The job listing said overnight security, fulfillment center, Fall River, MA. That was it. No experience required beyond a clean background check and a valid driver's license. Pay was decent. Hours were midnight to 6. The ad didn't mention much else, and I didn't need it to. I applied from my phone, sitting on the edge of my bed in a Brockton extended stay motel, the kind with a mini fridge that makes a clicking noise all night, and carpet that's been cleaned so many times it's basically just a smell now. I had 3 tabs open: that listing, my bank account, and a job board for private security firms in the metro area that I'd been ignoring for 2 weeks because every posting wanted references and I didn't have great ones right now. I closed the other 2 tabs and hit submit. That was November. The evidence thing had happened in September. I'm not going to get into all of it. But the short version is that a chain of custody log had my name on it, and then some things weren't where they were supposed to be, and I couldn't explain that in a way anyone found satisfying. Internal Affairs didn't find criminal wrongdoing. That was the good news. The bad news was that no criminal wrongdoing and still employable as a Boston police officer turned out to be 2 completely different things. 11 years on the job. Done. My ex-wife Denise called once after it went public. I let it go to voicemail. I still haven't listened to it. That's probably not great, but I'm also not in a hurry. So, Fall River, Amazon, overnight. Yeah. The fulfillment center is on Milliken Boulevard, out past the industrial stretch where everything's either a trucking company or a building that used to be something and now isn't. The facility itself is enormous in a way that doesn't fully land until you're standing inside it. From the parking lot, it just looks like a big gray rectangle. Inside, it's like someone took a warehouse and kept going. Rows of yellow shelving units that go back so far the far end gets hazy. Conveyor belts running through everything like veins. The ceiling is maybe 40 feet up and the lights hang down on long rigs and hum constantly, this low mechanical sound that after a few nights you stop hearing, and then one night you notice it stopped. And that's somehow worse. I showed up for my first day about 20 minutes early. I'm not great at being late to things. Old habit. Jackson Black was waiting for me by the security office near the south entrance. He was maybe 55, stocky, silver buzz cut, face like someone had left it out in the weather for a long time. He didn't shake my hand right away. He looked me over first, the way people do when they've sized up a lot of people and gotten efficient at it. Then he shook my hand. "Acosta," he said. "Yeah," I said. That was basically the whole introduction. He walked me through the facility at a pace that suggested he'd done this many times and didn't find it interesting anymore. Sector 1 through 6. The mezzanine level above sectors 3 and 4. The break room off the main corridor. The loading dock on the north end. He pointed at things. I nodded. He didn't ask if I had questions, and I didn't offer any. Before he handed me my radio, he pulled a laminated card out of his breast pocket and held it out. I took it. It was about the size of an index card, white, with text on both sides. The laminate had a small bubble in one corner. "Facility sits on land with some history," Jackson said. He said it the way you'd say the parking lot floods when it rains. Just a thing. Company put protocols in place. Keeps operations running smooth. I looked at the card. Then I looked at him. He wasn't smiling. He also didn't look like he was setting me up for a punchline. He just looked like a man who had said this particular sentence before and was done saying it. "Okay," I said. "Read it when you get a chance," he said. Then he went back to the security office, and that was the end of orientation. I put the card in my left breast pocket and forgot about it. The first week was exactly what I wanted. Quiet. Structured. Nobody needed anything from me. My shift ran midnight to 6. I'd clock in, do a sweep of sectors 1 through 3, take a break around 2, sweep 4 through 6, check the loading dock, check the mezzanine walkway, and clock out. The facility ran automated overnight with a skeleton crew of maybe 2 or 3 warehouse workers depending on the night, and they kept to themselves. We'd nod at each other in the corridor sometimes. Nobody talked much. It was great. The hum of the conveyor belts filled everything. Yellow bins everywhere, packed with stuff waiting to go somewhere. I'd walk the rows with my flashlight even though the overhead lights were on because that's what the job was. Walk. Look. Keep going. I slept during the day in the motel with the blackout curtains pulled. I ate at a diner on Route 6 that only plays 80s rock and has a laminated menu with pictures. I didn't talk to anyone I used to know. I didn't read the news much. I was honestly fine. Not happy, but fine, which after September felt like a significant upgrade. The laminated card stayed in my pocket. I moved it from my uniform shirt to my jacket and back again without ever unfolding it. Jackson's thing about the land and the history had sounded like the kind of thing older guys say to new hires to see if they'll get weird about it. I'd heard stranger stuff in 11 years with BPD. I figured it was nothing. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. Tuesday night, 8 days in. I was in Sector 4, about halfway through my post-2 a.m. sweep. The overhead lights dropped, not all the way off. They went from their normal flat white down to this dull orange, like the color of a street lamp through fog. It happened in about 3 seconds. The whole sector just went that color. The shadows between the shelving units got heavier. The hum of the conveyors changed pitch slightly, lower, and then evened back out. I stopped walking. I stood there for a second. My hand went to my radio. I didn't key it. I listened. The facility sounded the same. The belts were still running. Nothing was alarming exactly. It was just wrong in a way that was hard to name. I stood there in the orange dark between 2 rows of yellow bins and thought about Jackson saying the word protocols. Then I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out the laminated card. The card was laminated, like I said, glossy. The kind of thing you'd get at a hotel that tells you checkout is at 11, and please hang your towels if you want them reused. It had that same energy, informational, impersonal, like whoever made it had done this before and wasn't particularly interested in making it feel important. 5 rules, numbered, no header, no explanation, no company logo, just a list. The orange light made it harder to read than it should have been. I tilted it toward the nearest shelf light and squinted a little. The first one said if the conveyor belts moved backward, I was to leave the floor immediately and go to the break room. Stay there for exactly 20 minutes. Not roughly 20. Exactly. The second one said I was never to shine my flashlight into the mezzanine shadows. The third one said if I found a package addressed to the resident of the deep, I was to carry it to the incinerator chute and put it in without scanning it first. The fourth one said if a man in a vintage 1950s postal uniform asked me for directions to the loading dock, I was to point toward the south exit and say nothing. The fifth one said I was not to look into the security office monitors after 3 a.m. I read the whole thing twice. Stood there in the orange, half-dark between 2 rows of yellow bins and read it again. Then I kind of laughed. Not out loud. Just that thing where your face does it a little and you breathe through your nose. The resident of the deep. A man in a vintage postal uniform. I'd been a cop for 11 years. I'd processed evidence from crime scenes that would put most people off lunch for a week. I'd worked a case once where a guy kept his neighbor's mail for 4 years out of what he described as general principle. I'd seen weird. This wasn't weird. This was a bit. Jackson had the face for it, honestly. That flat, serious expression. The kind of guy who could hand you something completely absurd and hold eye contact without blinking. I'd met a few like that in BPD. They were always the ones running the long cons on rookies. You'd think they were the straightest arrow in the building, and then you'd find out they'd convinced 3 different guys that the break room microwave was haunted by a detective who died in the 90s. I figured that was it. Some version of that. A hazing thing. The kind of story that gets better the more the new hire plays along. I was still turning that over. kind of amused, kind of annoyed at myself for not reading the card sooner so I could have appreciated the setup earlier when I heard it. It came from somewhere deep in the facility. Not close. Sector 6, maybe 7. A groan, low and mechanical, the kind of sound a piece of industrial equipment makes when something's fighting against it. I know that sound. I'd heard it once before when a belt jammed on a Tuesday in week 2 and the whole sorting line shuddered before the system kicked off automatically. This wasn't that. This was the groan first, then a stutter, like something catching and slipping, and then the pitch of the whole facility changed. The hum I'd been walking around in for 8 days, the one I'd stopped noticing the way you stop noticing your refrigerator, it shifted. Lower. And then I realized what I was hearing was the belts running the wrong direction. Not stopped, running. Just backward. I stood there for a second. The card was still in my hand. Rule 1 was right there. I'd just read it maybe 40 seconds ago. Leave the floor immediately. Go to the break room. Stay for exactly 20 minutes. I thought mechanical glitch. I thought, these things jam, they reverse. There's probably a reset protocol and it kicks in automatically and the whole thing's back to normal in 3 minutes. I thought, if I go hide in the break room because of a conveyor hiccup, I'm going to feel like an idiot. I thought, Jackson probably set this up somehow. I thought, I'm not doing that. I pocketed the card. Then I walked toward the main sorter. I'm not going to pretend that was a smart call. Looking back, it was the kind of decision that makes sense in the moment, and makes 0 sense the second you're out the other side of it. I had just read a list of rules written by someone who clearly knew something I didn't, and the first rule had just activated, and my response was to go investigate. That's me. That's always been me. 11 years of it. Walk toward the thing, check the thing, figure out the thing. It worked fine right up until it didn't, and then I lost my job over it, and apparently I hadn't learned as much from that as I thought. The main sorter was in Sector 6. I walked through 4 and 5, past the tall shelving rows, past the yellow bins stacked too high in some places, past the emergency exit signs throwing their red glow down on the concrete floor. The orange overhead lights were still doing their thing. The shadows between the shelves were thick. I kept my flashlight pointed at the floor in front of me out of habit, which I didn't think about until later. The sound got louder the closer I got. That backward hum. There's a difference in the sound of a belt running forward versus backward, at least on this equipment. Forward has a kind of smooth, rhythmic quality. Backward sounds like it's working against something, like resistance. I came around the corner into Sector 6 and stopped. The main sorter line was running. All of it. Every belt I could see from where I stood was moving, packages sliding along the rubber surface, and every single one of them was going the wrong direction, toward the intake end instead of the outbound end. Back the way they came. That part bugged me a little. There were maybe 30 packages visible from where I stood. Different sizes, different colors of tape, different labels, all of them moving backward at the same steady pace. No jam. No error lights on the panel I could see. Just the whole system running in reverse like someone had hit a switch. I stood at the edge of the sorting area and watched for a minute. Tried to figure out if there was a logical reason for it. A reset cycle, maybe. Some kind of maintenance mode I hadn't been told about. I went through the list of things Jackson had mentioned in my first week and came up empty. He hadn't said anything about the belts running backward. He'd said a lot of things about the facility layout, about the check-in procedures, about the radio protocol with the morning shift. Nothing about this. I took a step closer. The packages kept sliding past me, slow and steady, heading the wrong way. One package was different. I almost missed it. It was toward the back of the line, moving with everything else, same slow backward crawl, but it was wet. Dark wet, not like a spill, more like it had been sitting in something for a long time and had soaked all the way through. The cardboard was soft-looking, the kind of soft where you know it'll fall apart if you squeeze it. The tape holding it together had gone dark too. Whatever was inside had leaked through the bottom and left a thin smear on the belt behind it. I watched it come toward me. I should have walked away. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I had the card in my pocket. I'd read it maybe 15 minutes ago. The rules were still fresh. But I was a cop for 11 years, and cops don't walk away from things that look wrong. That's basically the whole job. You see something that doesn't fit and you go toward it. I'd been doing that long enough that it wasn't even a decision anymore. It was just what happened. So I reached out and picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, and cold. Not cold like it had been in a refrigerator. Cold like something that had never been warm. The wet had soaked through to my gloves, and I could feel it even through the latex, that specific unpleasant cold that goes straight to your knuckles. I held it away from my body a little. The label was still readable. Whoever had printed it had used a standard shipping label, the kind you see on every single package in the building. White background, black text, barcode at the bottom. The sender field was blank. The destination field said, "The resident of the deep," no street address, no zip code, just that. I stood there holding it for a second. The resident of the deep. I read it twice to make sure I hadn't misread it. I hadn't. That was what it said. My hand was already moving toward the scanner on my belt. Pure habit. You find a package, you scan it, you log it, you figure out where it goes. That's the job. My fingers found the grip of the scanner, and I had it halfway out of the holster before something clicked in the back of my head. Rule 3. I stopped. I made myself stand still and think about it. The exact wording on the card had been specific. If you find a package addressed to the resident of the deep, place it in the incinerator chute without scanning it. Without scanning it. Jackson had put that in there for a reason. I didn't know the reason. I didn't need to know the reason. I'd read enough protocol documents in my life to know that the specific instructions are specific for a reason, even when nobody explains what the reason is. I put the scanner back. That's when I noticed the smell. It hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. I was pretty sure of that. It came in slow, like the building had taken a breath and exhaled something that had been sitting in the bottom of a harbor for a decade. Salt and rot and something else underneath that I didn't have a word for. Heavy. The kind of smell that coats the back of your throat and stays there. I'd smelled low tide before, growing up near the water in Boston. This was low tide's worst cousin, the one nobody talks about. The air felt different too. Thicker. Harder to move through, almost. I don't know how else to describe it. Like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees, and the humidity had gone up at the same time. I gripped the package tighter and started moving. The incinerator chute was on the south end of the floor, past the secondary sorting station, and through the double doors near loading bay 3. I'd walked past it 100 times. Maybe 2 minutes at a normal pace. I picked up the pace a little. The belt was still running behind me. I could hear it. That same steady mechanical hum, the packages sliding backward in the dark. I didn't look back. I was about halfway through the main floor when my flashlight moved. Not on purpose. I was walking fast and my arm swung out a little and the beam swept upward. Just for a second. It caught the mezzanine railing above me, lit up the metal and the shadows behind it, and then I brought it back down. That was when I heard it. A wet sound, like something heavy and damp being dragged across a hard surface. One slow pull, then another, coming from directly above me. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. I stood there in the middle of the floor with the package in one hand and the flashlight in the other, and I told myself to keep moving. I told myself that very clearly. Keep moving. Get to the incinerator. Deal with the package. Then figure out the rest. That was the correct sequence of events. I knew it was the correct sequence of events. I pointed the flashlight up at the mezzanine anyway. I don't have a great explanation for that. Old habit, maybe. Or just the particular kind of stupid that kicks in when you're scared and trying to prove to yourself that you're not. Either way, I did it. I broke the second rule on purpose, with full knowledge that I was breaking it. That's the part I'm least proud of. The beam hit the railing. There was a face. Pale. The kind of pale that's not a skin tone, just an absence of anything else. No eyes. Not closed eyes, not damaged eyes. Just smooth skin where the eyes should have been, unbroken, like they'd never been there. It was peering over the edge of the railing, looking down at me. Except it couldn't be looking, because there was nothing to look with. But that's what it was doing. I dropped the flashlight. I don't remember deciding to run. I was just running. The flashlight hit the concrete and the beam spun, and I was already moving. The package still in my hand, both hands now, holding it against my chest, and running hard toward the south end of the floor. My boots were loud on the concrete, and I didn't care. I hit the double doors with my shoulder, and they swung open, and I ran through the secondary sorting station without slowing down, and I found the incinerator chute on the wall exactly where it was supposed to be. I yanked the handle, and the chute door swung open, and I shoved the package in and slammed it shut. The smell cut off, just like that. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone. Clean air, normal air, the regular smell of cardboard and machine oil and whatever industrial cleaner they used on the floors. I stood at the chute door with my hand still on the handle and took a breath. My hands were shaking a little. Not a lot. Just enough that I noticed. I'd broken 2 rules. I'd walked toward the main sorter instead of going to the break room. I'd pointed my flashlight at the mezzanine. 2 rules, and both of them in the span of about 10 minutes. I was doing great. I let go of the chute handle and started moving toward the security office. I needed to sit down. I needed to think. I needed to be somewhere with walls and a door that closed. The clock on the wall near the loading bay read 2:58 a.m. I kept moving. The security office was a closet with pretensions, maybe 8 by 10 feet, a folding chair, a desk that wobbled if you breathed on it wrong, and a bank of monitors showing 6 camera feeds in grainy black and white. I'd spent most of my shifts in there doing nothing. Reading, eating a granola bar, watching the timestamp tick over on the bottom of the screens. It was the least interesting room in the building, which was exactly why I liked it. I sat down, and the chair made a sound like it was annoyed at me. 2 minutes to 3. My hands had mostly stopped shaking by then. I put them flat on the desk and looked at the monitors. 6 feeds. Sector 2, Sector 4, the loading bays, the mezzanine walkway, the south exit corridor, and the north dock. All of them quiet. All of them showing the same empty warehouse they always showed at this hour. Yellow bins and conveyor belts and the long shadows between the shelving rows. The mezzanine feed was just static. Had been since I sat down. I didn't know if that was normal or not. I'd never really paid attention to which cameras were working and which weren't. That felt like a significant oversight now. I kept watching the north dock feed. That's where I figured it would show up, if it showed up anywhere. The north dock had the most shadow coverage, the most places to be. I was doing what I'd done for 8 years on the force, which was pick a spot and watch it and wait for something to move. Old habit. Probably not useful here, but it was what I had. The timestamp hit 3:01. I leaned in closer to the north dock screen. The image was grainy and the contrast was bad, and I was trying to figure out if the shape near the far loading door was a pallet jack or something else entirely. So I leaned in, got my face maybe a foot from the glass. That's when I saw him. In the reflection of the monitor screen, standing directly behind me. Gray uniform. Old-fashioned cut, the kind you see in photographs from the 50s, with a short-brimmed cap and a breast pocket with a pen in it. He was holding a leather mailbag over one shoulder. The bag was moving, not swinging, not shifting with his weight. Moving on its own, from the inside, like something in it was trying to get comfortable and couldn't quite manage it. I didn't move for a second. Maybe two. Then I spun around. Nothing. Empty office. The folding chair, the wobbly desk, the door I'd closed behind me. That was it. The room was exactly as I'd left it, minus one man in a vintage postal uniform who apparently didn't exist. I turned back to the monitors. He was still in the reflection. Same spot, same bag, same gray uniform, but now he was pointing. One arm extended, finger aimed toward the right side of the reflection, which would have been the left side of the room, which was roughly the direction of the south exit. I watched him in the reflection for probably 5 seconds. He didn't move except for the bag, which kept doing what it was doing. Then the frost started. It came in from the edges of the screens, all 6 of them at once, thin white crystals spreading inward across the glass like someone had turned the temperature down behind the monitors. It moved slow. Not fast enough to be alarming, just fast enough that you couldn't pretend you didn't see it. I put my hand on the edge of the desk and felt how cold the surface had gotten. The whole room was colder. I hadn't noticed it happening, but it had been happening. 3 rules. I'd broken 3 rules in one night. I was keeping count now. The radio on the desk crackled. I looked at it, standard issue handheld, sitting in its charging dock. The kind of radio every warehouse security job uses. The kind that sounds like you're talking to someone through a paper bag. It crackled again, and then a voice came through. Jack. Pause. Hey, Jack. It's Terry. Terry Juarez. Morning shift. I knew Terry's voice. We overlapped by about 15 minutes every day, him coming in and me heading out. He was a calm guy, unhurried, always had coffee in a blue thermos. His voice on the radio sounded like his voice. Exactly like it. I'm up on the mezzanine, the voice said. I don't know what happened. I came in early and now I can't get back to the stairs. Can you come up? Terry wasn't due for 4 hours. I knew that. I knew what time it was. I knew Terry Juarez was at home in bed or watching something on his phone or doing whatever Terry Juarez did at 3 in the morning, which was not standing on the mezzanine of the Fall River Fulfillment Center. He wasn't here. He wasn't on that radio. I didn't touch it. The voice tried again. Jack, seriously, I can hear you breathing. Just come up to the mezzanine. It'll take 2 minutes. Then it changed. Not dramatically, not like a horror movie where the voice drops into something inhuman. It just shifted, the way a radio signal shifts when you're driving, and the station starts to fade and something else bleeds in underneath it. One voice becoming another. My mother's voice said my name. I haven't talked to my mother in 3 years. We're not estranged exactly, it's more complicated than that. But the point is, I know her voice better than I know most things in the world, and that was it. Coming out of a 2-way radio in a freezing security office in a warehouse in Fall River at 3 in the morning. I put both hands flat on the desk. It said something else. I didn't really process the words. I was focused on keeping my hands on the desk and not on the radio and not on the door. Then it changed again. Denise. That one landed differently. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. Denise and I had been done for 2 years, but there's a version of her voice that I still know the way you know a route you used to drive every day. Automatic. Before you even think about it. The radio had that version of her voice, the specific one she used when she was worried about something and trying not to show it. Jack, please, she said. Just come up. I gripped the edge of the desk hard enough that the wobble stopped. I didn't answer. I didn't pick up the radio. I didn't say a word. What I did was sit there and breathe and think about the laminated card. Jackson Black had handed it to me on my first day, and I'd pocketed it without reading it and spent a week thinking it was some kind of running joke the senior guards played on new hires. Hazing. a stupid tradition, something to laugh about later. It was not that. Whatever was on the mezzanine had an eyeless face and moved in wet, slapping sounds, and it wanted me to come up there, and it had apparently done its homework on me because it knew which voices to use. That's not a prank. That's not a building with a quirky history. That's something with a system, something that had been doing this long enough to know how to do it well. Containment protocol, that's what the card was. That's what all 5 rules were. And I'd broken 3 of them. Denise's voice said my name one more time, softer, and the radio went quiet. The frost had made it about halfway across the monitors. The postal worker was still in the reflection, still pointing toward the south exit, the bag still moving against his hip. I didn't look at him directly. I looked at his reflection, and I looked at the frost, and I kept my hands on the desk. I stayed in the chair. I didn't answer the radio. I didn't open the door. That was something, at least. The emergency kit was a red metal box bolted to the wall next to the fire extinguisher, right by the office door. I'd clocked it on day 1 the way I clock everything, out of habit. Old cop thing. I knew where the exits were, where the cameras were, where the first aid stuff lived. I hadn't thought much about the flares until right now. I got the box open. 2 road flares, a foil blanket, a whistle, some gauze. I grabbed both flares and put one in my jacket pocket and held the other. I didn't light it yet. I wasn't sure what lighting it would do exactly, but it felt better than going out there with nothing. That's probably not a great tactical reason. That's me. The frost on the monitors had stopped spreading. The reflection in the glass was still there, the postal worker still pointing, but I wasn't looking at it anymore. I kept my eyes low and moved for the door. The floor hit me with noise first. The belts were louder than before, that grinding mechanical churn coming from everywhere at once and faster, way faster. I could feel it in my feet through the concrete. Packages were moving backward in long, dark rows, sliding off the ends of belts and piling up against the sorting baffles. A few had already fallen to the floor. The whole place smelled like rubber and motor heat, that specific smell when something's running way past what it's supposed to. I didn't look up at the mezzanine. I kept my eyes at floor level and moved toward the sorting station. He was there, the postal worker, standing just past the main sorter, about 30 feet from me, the gray uniform clean and pressed like he'd just put it on. The leather mailbag was at his side. I could see it moving. That slow, irregular shifting. Something inside adjusting its weight. I didn't look at that either. I looked at his face, which was the wrong call the first time around. But this time I was looking at his face on purpose because I needed him to see that I was doing the thing, that I was following the rule. I raised my right arm and pointed. Toward the south exit, down the main aisle, past the shelving units, where the big rolling doors were. I didn't say anything. The rule said nothing, and I was done improvising. He looked at my arm. Then he looked at the exit. Then he nodded once, this slow, deliberate nod, and turned and walked into the gap between the shelving units. I watched him go until the gray uniform disappeared into the dark between the rows. His footsteps didn't make any sound. That part bugged me a little. The belts stopped, not slowing down, not winding out, just stopped. All of them, simultaneously, like someone had cut the power. The silence was immediate and total, and after all that noise, it felt wrong. The way a sound does when it's been there so long you stop hearing it and then it's gone and your ears don't know what to do. I stood there for a second. Packages sat still on the belts. Nothing moved. One down. I looked at the mezzanine stairs. They were on the north end, a metal staircase bolted to the wall, the kind that vibrates when you walk on it. The emergency lighting up there was minimal, just the green exit signs and the low amber strips along the floor edges. Enough to see by if you moved slow. I turned my flashlight off and put it in my back pocket. That was the rule I'd broken the first time, swinging the beam up into the shadows. I wasn't doing that again. I went to the stairs and started up. The stairs were exactly as loud as I expected. Every step rang out. I kept one hand on the railing and took it slow. The mezzanine level opened up above me, a long, narrow walkway that ran the full length of the north wall with the junction boxes and the manual overrides for the suppression system up here. I'd done a walkthrough on my second night. I knew the layout. What I didn't know was exactly where it was. I stopped at the top of the stairs and let my eyes adjust. Green light from the exit signs, amber strips along the floor, and past that, dark. The walkway went left and right. The junction box was to the right, about 40 feet down, I was pretty sure. Maybe 50. I lifted my wrist and angled my watch face toward the nearest exit sign. The crystal was polished enough to catch the light and throw a reflection, not a great one, but something. I tilted it slowly, scanning the walkway. I found it about 30 feet to my right. Huddled low against the wall near the junction box, pale and still. I didn't look at it directly. I kept my eyes on the watch face, and I kept moving, slow, one foot in front of the other, staying close to the opposite railing. It didn't move when I moved. That was either good or it wasn't. I decided not to think about which one. The junction box was a gray metal panel, surface-mounted, with a hinged cover. I'd seen it during the walkthrough. The manual override for the suppression system was inside, a big red lever that you had to flip up and then push sideways. It was designed to be hard to trigger by accident. 2 motions, not one. I kept the watch angled as I moved. The thing near the junction box shifted once, a slow adjustment, and I stopped walking. It settled. I kept going. I got to the panel. I got my hand on the cover latch. I checked the watch one more time, and the reflection showed it still against the wall, maybe 8 feet to my left. And I flipped the cover open and found the lever and pulled it up and shoved it sideways as hard as I could. The suppression system is not subtle. The whole ceiling opened up at once, industrial foam and water coming down in a solid wall of pressure, and the noise was immediate and massive. This sustained hiss that bounced off every metal surface in the building. I was soaked in about 4 seconds. The foam was cold and chemical smelling, and it got in my mouth and tasted like dish soap and something else I couldn't name. The shriek came from my left. Not loud the way a fire alarm is loud, not something you hear with your ears exactly. It was more like something that happened inside my skull, behind my eyes. A frequency that made my vision go white at the edges for a second and my back teeth ache. I grabbed the railing with both hands and kept my eyes down and waited. It stopped. The shriek just stopped, mid-note, like a switch. I didn't look. I turned around and went back to the stairs and went down them fast, one hand on the rail, not running but close. The foam was coming down on the floor level too, the sprinklers going across the whole facility, and the floor was already slick. I went carefully. I did not go back to the security office. I did not look at the monitors. I went straight to the break room, pushed the door open, and went inside. The break room was a folding table, 4 plastic chairs, a microwave from around 2009, and a Mr. Coffee machine that took the little pods. There was a clock on the wall, the analog kind with a second hand. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and looked at the clock. I stayed for 20 minutes. I didn't touch my radio. I didn't open the door. I watched the second hand go around, and I counted the minutes, and I let the clock do the work. The foam smell came under the door a little. The building was quiet. I sat there and I waited. The 20 minutes ended, and I got up and left. The loading dock was around the back of the building, past the south exit corridor and through a heavy steel door that opened onto a concrete platform about 4 feet off the ground. There were 2 dock bays with the big rubber bumpers and a set of stairs at the far end that went down to the lot. I went down those stairs and sat on the second step from the bottom. The concrete was cold through my pants. My clothes were soaked through and had been for a while, and the cold morning air was doing nothing good about that. I didn't have a jacket. I'd left it inside somewhere. I didn't go back for it. The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky was doing that thing where it goes gray-blue and you can start to make out shapes. The parking lot was empty except for my car, a 2014 Civic with a dent in the rear bumper I'd been meaning to deal with for about 2 years. The lot lights were still on, that pale orange sodium kind that makes everything look a little sick. I could hear the highway somewhere past the tree line, a truck. Then nothing. I was cold and wet, and I smelled like industrial foam and salt water, and I was sitting on the back steps of an Amazon warehouse in Fall River at around 5:45 in the morning, and I didn't have a single thought worth reporting. My head was just quiet, not the good kind of quiet, the kind where your brain has used up everything it had and is just running on empty, ticking over, keeping the lights on, but not doing much else. I sat there and looked at the parking lot and the dented Civic and the tree line going gray in the early light, and I didn't think about anything in particular. At some point, a crow landed on one of the dock bumpers and looked at me. I looked back at it. It left. Jackson's truck pulled in at 6 on the dot. A dark green Ford F-150, older model, one of those extended cabs. He parked it 2 spaces from my Civic and got out slow, the way he always did, like he had all the time in the world and knew it. He was in his supervisor uniform, pressed, which I thought was a little much for 6 in the morning, but that was Jackson. He looked at me sitting on the steps. He looked at my wet clothes. He looked at the building. He didn't say anything. He just walked past me and went inside. I heard the door open and close. I sat there. The sky was getting lighter. A car went by on the road out front, somewhere around the other side of the building. I counted a few minutes. Maybe 5, maybe 7. I wasn't tracking it closely. Then the door opened again and he came back out and stood at the top of the dock stairs with his hands in his pockets. He looked out at the lot for a second. Then he came down the stairs and stood next to me and looked at the tree line. "Foam's going to take a couple hours to clear," he said. "Yeah," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Incinerator's still hot." "I used the chute." He nodded once. That was it. He didn't ask what I put in the chute. He didn't ask about the foam or the mezzanine or the monitors or any of it. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets looking at the parking lot like we were 2 guys waiting for a bus. Then he held out his hand, palm up. I knew what he wanted. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out the laminated card and put it in his hand. He looked at it for a second. There was foam residue on the corner of it. He didn't comment on that. He just slipped it into his jacket pocket. "You did better than the last 3, he said. I didn't ask about the last 3. I thought about it for a second, and then I decided I didn't need to know. Some things you're better off leaving alone. I'd learned that about 8 hours ago, more or less. I broke 3 of the rules, I said. Yep. And it still worked out. He looked at me then, just briefly. "This time," he said. That landed. He didn't say anything else after that, and I didn't push it. He went back inside to deal with the foam situation, and I sat on the steps until the sun actually came up over the tree line, and the lot lights clicked off automatically. The morning went yellow and cold and ordinary. I could hear pigeons somewhere on the roof. A delivery truck came around the front of the building and beeped twice, which meant the day shift logistics crew was starting to show up. Normal sounds, regular morning. I got up, went to my car, and drove home. I kept the job. I don't know exactly why I expected that to be more complicated. I figured there'd be paperwork about the sprinkler system, or somebody from corporate would call, or I'd have to explain the incinerator usage to somebody in a headset. But nothing happened. Jackson handled whatever needed handling. The foam got cleaned up. The facility was back to normal by the time my next shift started. I showed up 40 minutes early that night. I sat in the break room with a cup of bad coffee from the Mr. Coffee machine, and I read through the protocols again. Not the card. Jackson had that back. I'd written them down in a small spiral notebook I bought at a CVS on Pleasant Street on my way in. 5 rules, written out in my own handwriting, clear and plain. I read them twice. I thought about each one. I thought about what happened when I didn't follow them, and I thought about what happened when I did. I put the notebook in my front left pocket, where I could get to it fast if I needed to. Then I went out onto the floor and started my shift. That's basically how it went from then on. I came in early. I read the rules. I did my rounds. The belts ran forward. The packages went where they were supposed to go. The mezzanine was empty. The monitors stayed off after 3. I checked every label before I touched anything, every single time, even the ones that were clearly a return from somebody in Taunton sending back a blender. I checked anyway. It took 2 extra seconds. That was fine. The nights got quiet. Not the bad kind of quiet, the other kind. Just the hum of the machinery and the occasional beep of the sorter and my boots on the concrete and the building doing what it was supposed to do. I got to know the sounds of the place, the specific pitch the conveyor made on the east side versus the west, the way the loading dock door rattled a little when the wind came in off the water. I knew which overhead light in Sector 3 flickered for 30 seconds every night at around 1:15 and then steadied out. Normal things, predictable things. I'd come to Fall River looking for exactly that. Routine. Quiet. Something low stakes where nobody knew who I was or what I'd done and nobody was going to ask. I'd wanted a place to just exist for a while without the weight of anything that mattered. I got that. I also got a clear understanding of what the routine was protecting against, which I hadn't been looking for but which turned out to be useful information. Probably the most useful information I'd had in years. I stopped treating the rules like noise. That was the whole change, really. Everything else followed from that. The facility ran fine. The shifts were manageable. I didn't look into the monitors after 3. I didn't shine my light into the mezzanine shadows. I pointed toward the south exit when I needed to, and I said nothing. I put certain packages in the incinerator chute without scanning them, and I didn't think too hard about what was inside. It was enough. It was actually enough. I'm not saying I figured it all out. I didn't. I still don't know what the thing on the mezzanine was, not really. I don't know who the postal worker was delivering for, or what was in the mailbag, or what would have happened if I'd answered the radio that night. I don't know what Jackson meant about the last 3 guards, and I made my peace with not knowing. Some doors you don't open. I know that now. I knew it before, technically, but knowing it and actually doing it are different things. And it took a wet Tuesday night in a foam-covered warehouse to get me the rest of the way there. I showed up for my shift the next Tuesday, and the one after that. The belts ran forward.